Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Welcome back to my channel. So today we're going to be continuing the series on how to solve trigonometric functions using product rule. And as you can see from the thumbnail and from the video and from the screen right now, you can see that we have cosine x multiplied by tan x, and this is what we're supposed to solve. So the first thing we have to do is to look at this function that we're given and see what kind of derivative rule we're supposed to use. Obviously, from the title of the video and from the thumbnail and basically what the video is about, we're going to apply the product rule because we have two sub-functions, cosine x and tan x, multiplied by each other. So when you have two sub-functions multiplied by each other and you're supposed to derive it, you're going to apply the product rule. When we apply the product rule, we're going to first of all do the derivative of the first sub-function multiplied by the second sub-function plus the derivative of the second sub-function multiplied by just the first sub-function by itself. So now that we know that, let's start applying. So we have d over dx of cosine x multiplied by tan x, right? Now the first thing we have to do is to first of all determine what f of x is in this question. We have f of x to be cosine x, okay, and g of x to be tan x. Now one thing you have to know is, because we're doing product rule and this is how it is in calculus, the first sub-function that we see, we always put that to be f of x if the expression, obviously this is what the general expression is supposed to look like, and the second sub-function we call that g of x. But the truth is, because it is product rule, you can actually decide to do tan x first and make that f of x, and cosine x, and you can make that g of x. But just for consistency in calculus and to avoid confusion, we make the first sub-function f of x and the second sub-function g of x. So we make the first sub-function the first thing that appears multiplied by the second term or sub-function that appears. So that's important for you to know. But let's go on to solve it. So now we have the derivative of f of x. In this case, f of x, we know that to be cosine x, right? So all of that multiplied by g of x. What do we know g of x to be? We know that to be tan x. I was about to write g of x. That's not right. So we know that to be tan x, and yeah. So plus the derivative of g of x, we know that to be d dx of tan x multiplied by f of x, which is just cosine of x. Okay. Now, what is the derivative of cosine x? So you guys, if you're watching my video for the first time, you probably don't already know this, but this is something that I do in all my trig videos, where I will have a screen or a page where there is the trig notes. So this part of the notes, this first area to the left side of the screen is just trig expressions, okay, like sine x equals to 1 over cosecant x, and cosecant x is the same thing as 1 over sine x, or secant x is the same thing as 1 over cosine x, or tan x is the same thing as 1 over cotangent x. So these are just basically trig expressions. Then the right side of the page has trig identities. This is where you have sine square x multiplied by cosine square x equals 1, or tan square x plus 1 equals secant square x, right? So these are trig identities. And the last one that we have in red is just basically everything that involves the derivative of small trig functions. So that's what this is, the derivative here of small trig functions. So if you use this the first time watching the video, please pause it right now and copy all of this information down, because as we go through the series, because this series is going to have over 40 questions, you're going to be dealing with this. You're literally going to be dealing with this information a lot, and it'll be good for you to have this note so that it will help you as you go through the series and as you're applying product rule. And also I have a video on chain rule for trig substitution, as well as trig function, chain rule for trig functions, as well as quotient rule for trig functions. And this is obviously the series on product rule for trig functions. So now we know that the derivative of cosine x, what did we get that to be? Derivative of cosine x, it's sine x. So we have equals to, we said it is negative sine x, not just sine x, negative sine x. So we put negative sine x here, right? Then we have tan x that is multiplied by that. So we have that plus, what is the derivative of tan x? The derivative of tan x would be secant square x. So we're going to have that here, secant square x, right? And multiplied by cosine of x. Now the next thing we have to do is, this is what we have so far. But whenever you have questions like this in calculus, or questions that involve trig, I would advise you to make your work neater and clean it up. Clean it up. Make it look nice, make it look neat. Even though this answer right here is okay and this is correct, we can work on this further to be able to have a neater answer. So we go to the next page. I'm going to rewrite what we had. So from the previous page, we can see that we have negative sine x tan x. So we had negative sine x tan x, right? Plus secant square x cosine of x. Okay, that's that. The next thing you can do is sine x here. We can write how what everything is, and we're going to see here that first of all we can do this. We can change everything to look like sine x and cosine x. Okay, so if you look at this page, we can see that tan x can be written as 1 over cotangent x or sine over cosine x. So we're going to say negative sine x multiplied by sine x, okay, over cosine x, plus we have secant square x. What is secant square x? We see secant x equals 1 over cosine x, right? If you guys pause the video and literally wrote it down, if you're new to this series, you would easily remember secant x equals 1 over cosine x. So here we have secant square x equals what? That's just going to be 1 over cosine square of x. And then we have cosine x here, just comes down, cosine x. So now what do? We cancel it out because we're trying to make our work neater. So cosine x gets cancelled, cosine square x gets reduced by 1. So that's what we have. So at the end of the day, we end up with, basically, let me rewrite what our answer would be. We end up with sine square x over cosine of x, right, plus 1 over cosine of x. So now what do? We can just easily bring out 1 over cosine of x, okay? And when we do that, let's not forget that when we factor that out, we're going to end up with negative sine square x plus 1. Okay, so you might be wondering, okay, this is basically, we've broken it down, we've canceled stuff out, we factor stuff. This is supposed to be the answer at this point, but no, we can still play with the trig identities and the trig expression. Basically, we can go back to the trig notes to see what else we can do. Now we see here sine squared x plus cosine squared x equals 1, right? Now we can write it down here and say, okay, remember that sine squared x plus cosine squared x equals 1. So we can say, if we want to basically do it the way it's supposed to be done, we can have cosine square x here equals to 1 minus sine square x. Okay, you see 1 minus sine square x. So you have cosine square x will be 1 minus sine square x, or you can also call it negative sine square x plus 1, which is what we basically have here, right? That's what we have here. So we can just replace all of this information here. So 1 over cosine x is going to be multiplied by cosine square x, because negative sine square x plus 1 is the same thing as cosine square x. So we have this to be our answer. We can cancel this out. So the next thing we can have is basically cosine x. So therefore, the derivative of sine x, right, multiplied by the derivative of cosine x multiplied by tan x is cosine x. So derivative of cosine x, right, multiplied by tan x, we see that that's going to give us cosine x. So even though, if we go to the previous page, this answer here, right, this answer that we have in this red box here that I'm double shading, this is correct. Hope you guys know that. This answer here that I'm going to put in a black box like this is also correct, but the best one for us to have a neat work, the way a mathematician is supposed to work, is actually going to be cosine x. So that's how you get it, but I also have a shortcut of all of this, right? So don't click off this video. I also have a shortcut, and the shortcut is basically for us to have, we have this, we're supposed to get the derivative of cosine x tan x, right? But if you look at it, before you apply anything, cosine x, right, multiplied by tan x, what is that? If you remember the trig expressions, you would see that we said tan x can be known as 1 over cotangent x, can also be known as sine x over cosine x. So the shortcut method is going to be cosine x, okay, multiplied by, we know tan x equals sine over cosine, sine x over cosine x, right? So you have sine x, okay, over cosine x. Does that make any sense? So you can cancel this out. Cosine x, you can cancel out cosine x. So this will be sine x. So now, even though they told you to find the derivative of cosine x multiplied by tan x and use product rule, if you have a multiple choice question that asks you this, all you have to do is, you can just know now that the derivative of cosine x tan x, right, cosine x tan x is the same thing as asking you the derivative of sine x, right, which is going to just simply be cosine x. And if you look at the previous page or previous screen, we see that our answer here is cosine x. And if you guys even think about it, when you do calculus and you look at the first page, for those people who've been doing this, like this derivative of sine x as cosine x and derivative of cosine x as negative sine x is the easiest of the derivative of trigonometric functions that you would see. So you guys probably already kind of figure it out, because the derivative of sine x is cosine x and the derivative of cosine x is negative sine x. And in this case, after doing the shortcut method, you realize that cosine x multiplied by tan x is the same thing as sine x. So therefore, the derivative of cosine x tan x is the same thing as the derivative of sine x. So let me say that again. Therefore, the derivative of cosine x multiplied by tan x is the same thing as the derivative of sine x. So therefore, we end up having our answer to be cosine x. And that is the end of this video. So I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'm hoping that resources that are available in this video and this series will be very helpful to you guys. If you want to know more about my channel, my website, and everything, go into the description box and make sure you connect with me even outside of YouTube. I also wanted to mention this is a series video, so please keep watching the series as you go on. And there's also trigonometric function for chain rule and quotient rule on my channel, as well as other calculus related and chemistry and physics and mathematics related problems that you're going to see. So take care of yourself, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.